It began like any other spring morning in Mobile, Alabama. The kind of day where the sun filters through the trees in slow golden rays, and the heat hasn't yet begun to stick to your skin. The year was 1980, a time before smartphones, before security cameras on every corner, before 24-hour news cycles flooded every missing person report with urgency. Back then, silence could stretch for days before anyone panicked. But this silence, this one grew too loud, too fast. Catherine Foster was 18 years old, a freshman at the University of South Alabama, a daughter, a sister, a devout Christian, a young woman just beginning to shape her future, with plans to study physical therapy and dreams of healing others. She was bright, reserved, and thoughtful, the kind of student who sat in the front row, the kind of girl who didn't skip class, the kind of presence that quietly held weight in a room. On the morning of March 20th, 1980, Catherine was supposed to go grocery shopping with her two close friends, Tish and Jamie. The plan was simple: meet up, walk together, and grab supplies. But just as they were about to leave, Catherine paused. She said she forgot something in her dorm and would catch up with them in a few minutes. She never did. At first, her absence didn't raise alarm. Maybe she got delayed. Maybe she changed her mind. A missed trip wasn't unusual, not enough to worry anyone yet. But by evening, concern began to settle in. Catherine wasn't in her dorm. She wasn't answering the phone. She hadn't called home. And most unsettling of all, she missed her classes the next morning. That was the moment her friends knew something was wrong. Very wrong. This was a girl who followed routine like scripture. She didn't miss class. She didn't disappear. Call was placed to her family. Her dorm was searched again. Nothing. A missing persons report was filed. The campus, which once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a maze. Flyers went up. Word spread. Students were asked to check their buildings, their common areas, and the wooded paths they walked every day without thinking. But nothing turned up. Not a shoe, not a bag, not a trace. 2 days passed. And then on Saturday morning, March 22nd, a volunteer joined the growing search party, combing the brush near the campus perimeter. Just 150 feet from the road, partially concealed by undergrowth and damp leaves, they saw her, Catherine Foster, lying flat on her back. The scene was deceptively serene. Her body wasn't hidden. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no torn clothing. Her posture suggested almost a strange kind of peace, as if she had simply lain down and closed her eyes. But peace was a lie. The responding officers held back bystanders and secured the scene. A forensic team was called in immediately. Catherine's body was preserved exactly as it was found, a critical detail. The air grew heavy. Every small movement felt loud. And in that grim silence, the truth emerged. Catherine had been executed. Her body bore 2 bullet wounds, both to the back of her head. One fired from a distance, the other at near-contact range. The first shot likely rendered her unconscious. The second was a finishing blow, deliberate, precise, without hesitation. There were no signs of sexual assault, no defensive wounds. Her clothes were undisturbed. Her shoes were still on. No valuables were taken. This was not a robbery. This was not a panic crime. This was personal. Whoever did this wanted Catherine dead, and wanted it done cleanly. The medical examiner confirmed she had likely been dead for nearly 2 full days, which meant she was murdered not long after she vanished. But something didn't add up. If she was killed so quickly, why had her body taken so long to be found? And why, with dozens of students walking those wooded paths daily, had no one seen or heard anything? Detectives began building a timeline. The last confirmed sighting was by her 2 friends, Tish and Jamie. Thursday morning, she had left them to return to her dorm. But did she ever make it there? Witness statements were inconsistent. Some students claimed to have seen her later that day. Others said they saw nothing unusual. Campus security logs were minimal, sparse in detail, and not particularly helpful. The investigation widened. Her friends were questioned. So were her professors, classmates, and dorm neighbors. But nothing stood out. Catherine had no known enemies. No fights. No strange behavior in the days before. No boyfriends or exes that raised red flags. She had simply vanished and then reappeared as a body. Media coverage started slowly. Local outlets covered it as a campus tragedy. But without leads, the story faded. The world kept moving, and Catherine Foster became a cautionary tale. A girl who vanished in the middle of the day, on a college campus, surrounded by people, and no one saw a thing. There was no panic in the shot, no rage, no signs of a struggle. That's what unsettled detectives the most. The murder of Catherine Foster wasn't chaotic, it was composed. And that terrified investigators, because execution-style killings aren't random. They're rehearsed, intentional, cold. As the forensics report circulated through the Mobile Police Department, one detail jumped out. The 2 shots weren't just clean, they were efficient. .38 caliber revolver, a weapon known for its silence. One that didn't eject shell casings. Killer's choice. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. And more disturbingly, they wanted Catherine to suffer as little as possible. That single fact divided the task force. Some saw it as a sign of compassion. A killer unable to look her in the eyes. Someone racked with guilt, who couldn't bear confrontation. Others believed the opposite, that it was calculated, that whoever pulled the trigger had done it before, or thought about it long enough to be comfortable doing it now. But there was still one gaping problem: motive. Who would want Catherine Foster dead? Her records were clean. No run-ins with the law, no disciplinary actions, no drug use, no ties to dangerous people. She didn't even drink. She was deeply religious, sang in her church choir back in Sylacauga, and volunteered at a local nursing home. Her friends described her as kind, quiet, and private. A little reserved, yes, but not troubled. She didn't live the kind of life that ended with a bullet to the skull. And yet, someone ended it. Detectives circled back to the crime scene. They walked the wooded stretch where her body had been found, a patch of trees behind the intramural field. Sparse foliage, thin cover, not an ideal dump site. So why here? The positioning suggested the killer didn't intend to hide her for long. Catherine had been placed, not thrown. There were no drag marks, no branches disturbed. She had either been killed where she lay, or carried there carefully. And then they saw it. About 40 feet from her body, in a patch of damp leaves, a single plastic button. Light blue, the exact shade of the blouse Catherine had last been seen wearing. The theory shifted. What if she was killed elsewhere and moved after the fact? That's when the timeline began to fracture. The detectives started looking harder at those closest to Catherine, especially the friends who'd last seen her, Tish and Jamie. Tish came from a strict family background and had known Catherine since high school. They roomed in the same dorm block. Jamie was newer, a loud, energetic presence on campus who often pulled Catherine out of her shell. Both were cooperative, visibly shaken, and both had alibis. Still, something about their version of events didn't feel airtight. Tish claimed she last saw Catherine at 9:15 a.m. when she went back to the dorm. Jamie said it was a little later, closer to 9:30. Neither noticed anything unusual, but when questioned separately, small inconsistencies emerged. Tish recalled Catherine saying she forgot her purse. Jamie said it was her keys. Neither could explain why, if she forgot something so small, she never made it back down. Another question haunted detectives. Why hadn't anyone seen her after that moment? In a campus filled with students, professors, janitors, and staff, how could a young woman vanish without a single confirmed sighting? Unless she had gone willingly, or worse, was taken by someone she trusted. The investigation turned inward. Dorm logs, sign-in sheets, maintenance schedules. One name kept surfacing: David Timmons, a 24-year-old maintenance worker who was recently hired by the university. No criminal record, lived alone, kept to himself. His schedule placed him near Catherine's dorm on the morning she disappeared. A custodian remembered seeing him cleaning stairwells around 9:30 a.m. Another claimed he left early that day, looking pale. He wasn't a suspect yet, but he was a puzzle piece. When police questioned him, David was calm. Too calm. He answered everything, claimed he never met Catherine, never spoke to her, didn't even know what she looked like. He had a time card, a witness, a solid front. But there was one thing he didn't expect: the button. Police presented it without context. A small, seemingly meaningless object. When David saw it, he blinked. Just once. His throat tightened. Barely. That was enough. Detectives obtained a warrant to search his apartment. It didn't take long. Folded neatly in the back of his closet, inside a plastic bag, was a blouse. Light blue, missing a button. A near-perfect match to the one found near Catherine's body. He claimed it wasn't hers. He claimed it was his ex-girlfriend's. But the DNA told a different story. It was Catherine's. The arrest came swiftly. David Timmons was charged with the abduction and murder of Catherine Foster on April 2, 1980, exactly 13 days after she vanished. His mugshot painted the picture of a man trapped, not in grief, not in regret, but in disbelief that he had been caught. Interrogation revealed little. He denied everything, refused to speak, and when confronted with the evidence, he stared straight ahead, silent. The motive remained maddeningly unclear. No romantic involvement, no obsession, no history of stalking, no violent outbursts in his past. Catherine didn't even know who he was. The only theory, a chance encounter. One of the investigators, off the record, shared what he believed had happened. David saw her enter the dorm alone, that he followed her inside, that something in him snapped, not in rage but in opportunity. He waited, cornered her, used a gun to control the situation, and whatever happened next, whether she screamed, resisted, or simply pleaded, didn't matter. He had already made up his mind. The shot was precise. The execution was methodical, and Catherine Foster was gone. The courtroom where David was being prosecuted was packed. By the time jury selection began in late June of 1980, the murder of Catherine Foster had already become a lightning rod across Alabama. Reporters lined the front steps of the Mobile County Courthouse. Inside, the Foster family sat in rigid silence. A mother clenching rosary beads in her lap, a father gripping the edge of the bench so tightly his knuckles went white. Across the aisle sat David Timmons, pale, restrained, and expressionless. A man accused of executing a girl he claimed he had never met. But the prosecution painted a different picture. One of opportunity, predation, and precision. The evidence was sharp. They showed jurors the light blue blouse, the same one Catherine was last seen wearing. A match to the button was recovered near the crime scene. They presented the forensic timeline, the bruising on Catherine's wrists, the gunshot trajectory, the lack of defensive wounds. They played the 911 audio from the anonymous tip, the call that had led police to her body in the first place. A man's voice, shaking, distorted, likely placed from a payphone. Analysis would later confirm the call had originated just 4 blocks from David Timmons' apartment. And then came the turning point. A coworker stepped forward. She had worked alongside David for months. Quiet man, never caused trouble. But on the morning of March 20th, the day Catherine disappeared, she remembered something strange. David showed up late, sweating, hands trembling, claimed he spilled something on his clothes and needed to go home to change. When he returned, he was wearing a shirt 2 sizes too small. He didn't speak the rest of the day. The defense tried to poke holes. They claimed Catherine may have gone to meet someone willingly, that the DNA could have been transferred in another way, that the blouse might have belonged to someone else entirely. They offered no alternate suspect, only doubt. But it wasn't enough. On July 12, 1980, after only 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict. Guilty. David Timmons was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death by electric chair. His appeal was automatic, but in Alabama, that didn't stop the process. A date was set. The execution would take place in the spring of 1981. The decision sparked fury and debate. Across Mobile, the Foster family was flooded with letters. Some offered condolences. Others weren't so kind. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse with signs that read, "Not in our name," and "Justice, not revenge." The The local AM radio station held live call-ins every afternoon. Half the town called for blood, the other half called for mercy. But through it all, the only person who never spoke was David Timmons. He refused every interview, declined a statement to the family. His attorneys begged him to show remorse, to fight for life. But he wouldn't. And so, on a rainy morning in April 1981, inside the cold stone walls of Holman Correctional Facility, David was strapped into Yellow Mama, Alabama's electric chair. He was 25 years old. His last meal was fried catfish and sweet tea. He declined a priest. He declined to speak. At 12:02 p.m., the switch was flipped. By 12:07, he was pronounced dead. Outside the prison gates, protesters held candles. Others held signs. But inside the foster home, there was no celebration. Just a quiet grief that hadn't gone away, only grown heavier with time. "I didn't want vengeance," Catherine's mother told the press. "I wanted my daughter. Nothing they do can give her back." But the case wouldn't fade. In the decades that followed, the murder of Catherine Foster became a landmark case in Alabama's judicial history, not just because of the execution, but because of the questions it raised. Why had David Timmons done it? No sexual assault, no ransom demand, no stalking, no clear motive, not even a confession. He died with his silence. Some speculated he had developed a fixation. Others believed it was spontaneous, a brief, horrifying break in sanity. A clinical psychologist who reviewed the case years later said the murder was likely motivated by control, the fantasy of power, the rehearsal of dominance, the absence of chaos. But no one knew for sure, and maybe that was the cruelest part. Today, there's a memorial plaque just off the trail behind the intramural fields at the University of South Alabama. It reads, "In loving memory of Catherine Foster, kindness was her habit, music was her joy, taken too soon, never forgotten. Each spring, a candlelight vigil is held in her name. Students gather, faculty speak, a choir sings, but the woods remain unchanged, quiet, indifferent, still. The same patch of trees, the same narrow path, the same brutal silence. And in that silence, Catherine's story lingers. A reminder that sometimes evil doesn't come with a warning. It doesn't wear a mask. It doesn't knock. Sometimes it's already inside the building." If you found this case chilling, disturbing, or left with more questions than answers, you're not alone. At Trace of Evil, we don't just tell stories. We expose the unsettling truths that hide behind closed doors and familiar faces. Subscribe to uncover more cold cases, forgotten crimes, and real-life mysteries that never got the headlines they deserved. And remember, evil leaves a trace. You just have to know where to look.